Hi, this is Janet Fitch, and if it's noon on Wednesday, it's Writing Wednesday, where I answer your writing questions, specific or general, inspiration, creativity, or sentence stuff, character problems, plot problems. I know that writers have it all. There's so many ways to get yourself in trouble or issues that come up. So please ask me in the comments, or if you have a question you'd like me to make a Writing Wednesday around, you can put it in on my website. There's a contact information, and you can email me and I can do a whole Writing Wednesday around your question. So I hope you can take a look at on YouTube. I'm putting all the bit by bit, all the archived Writing Wednesdays are going up on my YouTube channel. Just Janet Fitch's Writing Wednesday. I've got about 100 videos up there. I've been doing this for a little while now. Hi, Zunaid. Good to see you. So today I have a question from somebody who sent it to me through my website. Jane Ross has written me a question about synopses. Now, every application that you make with your novel will ask for a synopsis. In her case, here's her question. Question for Writing Wednesday. Hi, Janet. I understand you like to focus on creative process in Writing Wednesdays. Yeah, generally it's going to be about that. Rather than the business of publishing. Yeah, I tend to prefer to talk about the creative process because people get too into selling, because we live in a capitalist country, and we're, as creative people, we're being trained to be salespeople, and sometimes people forget, the artistry comes first, way first. Until you have something you need to sell, you're done writing, and then comes the other stuff. But without the writing, what point? What's the point? But there will be times that you will be making applications. Here's Jane's question. Would you consider talking about how to write a brief synopsis of your novel? I'd like to be considered for a juried workshop this summer, and all require a synopsis. Now, these are 250-word synopsis, so that means 1 page, double-spaced, which is a lot better than a 5-page synopsis. The difficulty with synopses is that every book sounds terrible when it's synopsized. Terrible. There is funny enough, there's a Q&A in Poets and Writers, an organization I support, and I hope you guys will occasionally look at their website. They have so many great articles about all the businessy aspects, and they interview agents. And there was a Q&A with 4 agents, and the synopses are awful. They try not to read them when they're being set a query in synopsis. They generally tend not to read them because the book itself is the proof of the pudding, right? Not what you say about it. Nevertheless, there are many times where you need to write a synopsis to apply for a grant, to apply for a residency. She says, I'm applying for juried workshops this summer, including Tin House and Community of Writers, where I teach. I'm struggling mostly with the brevity How do you condense your whole story into 250 words? Do you try to inject your novel's voice into the synopsis or write a dry, clean summary? How do you decide what to leave out? Do you focus on character or plot? Or does that depend on whether you're writing literary fiction versus genre? What if your novel is still in progress, as it will be if you're applying for residency, with only a skeletal outline? I have many questions and having trouble finding answers. Enjoy your Writing Wednesdays. Find them useful. Thank you for doing them. Okay, so here is my thought about synopses. I hate them. I think that they're a sales tool, which, sometimes we're called upon to do them. But remember, the longer they are, the worse your book will seem. Every synopsis makes the book sound terrible. I mean, synopsize any book, and it will sound terrible. Synopsize To the Lighthouse. Middle-class British people dominated by an irascible father plan a trip to the lighthouse that never happens. Interactions with siblings and guests in the house. Mrs. Ramsey worries about, her husband. Who wants to read that? What's Ulysses about? Okay, so the brevity, that you worry about, Jane, is actually an asset. The shorter you can make this thing, the better. The more you tell about the details, the less you're going to like it, the less anybody is going to like it. So avoid as much as you possibly can. Yeah, everybody hates writing them, Janet. But everybody, they make your book sound terrible. They're really hard. Okay, so first, when you're writing, say for a query letter is a sales tool. This is where you're looking for an agent normally, and you are synopsizing your book. They want to know sort of what's it about. Just like, you're some uncle at a family party. Oh, what's your book about? So when I talk about story, I usually think in terms of setup and payoff. The setup is always more interesting than the payoff. So put your emphasis, when my advice, this is, grain of salt, every writer has to confront this question on their own, but my advice is to concentrate on the setup. When so I go for if you think of story a character-driven story in terms of the XYZ format that I talk about when I do story at length, basically X is your character. What are their characteristics? So we're not talking about blonde hair, blue eye, blue, that stuff. But their salient characteristic. When angry, abandoned, orphan Rose, so-and-so, finds herself left in the care of an absent uncle, and having to deal with a spoiled, neurotic cousin of her own age, she discovers that, everyone needs love, whatever, the pressure is put on her character. So if I was going to synopsize that book, which is The Secret Garden, I would concentrate on the setup the windswept moors and the angry rejected girl who's nevertheless trying to maintain her dignity and sense of self, coming in contact with somebody actually very like herself, and the both of them grow up because of it. I concentrate on the setup. When you're doing a synopsis, it is a sales tool. So what you want to do is interest people. So one of these questions was, do you try to inject your novel's voice into the synopsis or write a dry, clean summary? Well, what do you think you would want to read? A dry, clean summary or something with some voice to it? Because part of this is a writing sample. Anything you send to any kind of judging organism, be it an agency or a retreat center or a conference, is a sales tool. You're giving them a writing sample. So in making it clean, boring, you're giving them a boring writing sample. Why would you do that? So you do want to show your the flavor of your thought, the flavor of your language. You don't want to overdo it and stand on your head and wave flags with your toes or something, but you do try to give a feeling for not only the story, but for your voice. So yes, be very careful with dragging in more and more of the secondary characters. Your kind of a rule of thumb might be to just talk about one of the if there's many subplots, you might not want to go down every alley to explain the whole book, but you're going to delineate who your protagonist is, who your antagonist is, and then maybe one or two of the subplot characters and situations that have bearing on the issues of the book. So once you start pulling in more subplots, and also she's doing this, and also cut all that. It's it's a good exercise in that you have to know for yourself what your book is about. And normally we don't know when we start. It takes at least, a draft. It takes at least a couple of, for me, it might take a couple of years to really know what my book was about. My first book, White Oleander, that was a book that I thought was the portrait of the artist as a young girl. But that as I went along, I realized that it was a story about a girl who is in a deep dependency on her scary mother. And, it was about her searching for mother through foster care. It took me a while to figure that out. And then how do you explain it? My second book, what was that about? Painted Black, the suicide of a suicide in punk rock LA. So you want to, aftermath of a suicide. And, but it had a lot to do with the triangle between the dead boy, the girl, and the boy's mother, who blames her for the death. So that's the setup. And I'm going to talk about the setup mostly in a synopsis rather than what happens. if you're funny, if your book has humor in it, the synopsis might have a little humor, but try not to be too snarky. Try not to be dismissive of your own work, like, standing away from the characters and lo and behold, making fun of your own book is not a good idea, generally speaking. So you want to set up the main characters, maybe a couple of the secondary characters, and what the basic conflict is. What the basic problem, your character's basic problem. What kind of a trip are we taking here? What kind of a voyage is this? If you find yourself getting too detailed, you're gonna make your book sound terrible. So this is a great process to really evaluate your own work, because you have to decide what's the major plot, what's the major story, and then what's the secondary stories, which of the secondary stories are most essential to the development of that major story. And right now I'm like straddling that myself, because I have kind of a late life coming of age, plus a kind of interesting mother-daughter story, where the culprits are, who is the villain. I mean, it gets passed around a bit. And so to be able to fold those two ideas together would be my job in the synopsis. The other thing that is really important is to figure out I don't want to say the staging, but the mood and the location. Like, I'm, where is it set? I'm big on, where is it set? The first two books my first two books were definitely set in LA, and then set in a milieu. One of them was set in the foster care system in LA. The next one was set in the punk rock world and in the world of classical music, all in LA in 1981. In the Russian Revolution novels, I take you through the Russian Revolution. It's set in Petrograd, which is St. Petersburg, Russia, and then takes her into Russia, into the countryside during the Civil War, and then back to St. Petersburg, to Petrograd. And, the feeling of your setting, of your location, the mood, is extremely important when you're doing a synopsis, because it gives the flavor of the book. If it's set in the world of the surrealists in Paris in the 30s, already gives the reader a feel for your book and what kind of a book it is. It's a thriller set in Sweden in the wintertime, in a small village. That certainly gives you a lot. And people often forget that the setting is going to be really important in a synopsis. I think that the layering of your plot is interesting. To be able to have a character who is moving towards in solving this problem, but there's also leftover problems from the past that are going to come and affect that. Can you say a bit more, Lisa is asking, about why too much detail is suboptimal? It's when you've read enough of them, it's blow by blow. It's what I call you're too face in carpet. You don't want to be too face in carpet. You want the somebody looking at this, they don't want to know who punched who, over hamburgers at Uncle, Leon's barbecue. That's too granular. It's too face and carpet. The cousins have been on the outs since a fight at Uncle Leo's barbecue. I mean, that's enough. Don't take us into the scenes. Ask us, you don't want it, the more granular detail you put in there, the less somebody is going to care about your book, the worse it's going to sound. It's like, and then. It's like the way children tell a story. You just want to shoot yourself in the head. Don't tell it the way a child would tell it. And then. You want pull back and give us a sense of how it's set up so that that spring is wound up, and then, then the machine gets let go. Yeah, writing more about place than protagonist is more. Ruthie is saying. After writing a recent synopsis, it was obvious I was writing more about place than protagonist. That's interesting. Yeah, so you have to see the how the setting embraces the conflict, embraces the story, how the character works out their story through the environment. Let me think of when an uptight widow moves to Provence. Let's talk about it. That's a whole cottage industry. When the uptight widow, moves to Jamaica, and gets her groove back, whatever. Yeah, that the setting is absolutely important. There's a book that I read a couple of years ago called Golden Child, which was set in the Caribbean. I think it was Trinidad. And it had, the storms and the kidnappings from, not political kidnappings, but economic kidnappings. And, the seething kind of brink of civil war, brink of anarchy. It gave such a feeling of danger in the plot and it was intrinsic to the plot. Things happen in the story that are a reflection of the violence of the place, but also the beauty of it. You need to include it, but it's a foreground background thing. It's always the background. The characters and the conflict between the characters is the foreground. So don't, start licking the scenery. If you're too interested in the scenery as opposed to the conflict, you're going to, it's going to seem like a travelogue rather than a novel. Ruthie says, in other words, I thought I was writing one thing, but it turned out to be something different. I either needed to change the story or get back on track. Yeah, doing this, hi Janet, doing this is really good for your work because it makes you see your book better. And also to see what you were trying to do as opposed to what you're actually doing. And like Ruthie said, sometimes you have to correct course. It's like, oh, it's not really this, it's that. The most difficult is when you have a couple of different strands going and you haven't gotten to the end. You're applying for a residency to work on this book. So you have two different strands going, and you don't know which is going to be the major. Pick one. Write it as if that's what you've done. Because they're not going to come in and read your manuscript and go, oh, you ended up not doing that. It has to be convincing on the page in the moment, a synopsis. It doesn't have to be the actual thing. The other thing is fly copy, jacket copy. Will use this same kind of process. But you'll already have a finished book. And you'll have to write jacket copy. And generally, you don't say what happens in jacket copy. It's you set up the problem, what the basics situation is, and it's a very difficult thing. Let's see what my jacket copy looked like on. Let's see. This is Marina M. St. Petersburg, New Year's Eve, 1916. So I started actually with the beginning of the book. Marina Makarova is a young woman of privilege who aches to break free of the constraints of her genteel life. So this is so... It's so reductive. It's shocking to the writer. But the reader needs to just basically know, like, what's it about? Who are we talking about here? If I told the conflicts that this girl has at the beginning, I wouldn't, they might as well just read the book. So I need to I need to edit it as far down as I can. So Marina is a young woman of privilege who aches to break free of the constraints of her genteel life. That's something a reader can absorb. If I say she's a poet and admires the futurists and the acmeists and blah, blah, and what her political stripe is, that's just that's too much for the reader to absorb. Even character, that's too much. So I just, her most salient points. Aches to break free of the constraints of genteel life, a life about to be upended by the vast forces of history. Okay, the Russian Revolution. Got it. Swept up in these tides of great change, she will join the marches for workers' rights. No, I'm not telling her all about the parties and what's going on in the country and, all of her varied thoughts about these things. Her friends who have their own, like she has a radical friend who is pushing her into this, opening a world for her. Not going to be in the synopsis, not for a jacket copy. Swept up in these tides of great change, Marina will join the marches for workers' rights, fall in love with a radical young poet. She's a poet too, but that's not an action. They were more, fall in love with a radical young poet and betray everything she holds dear before being betrayed in turn. That's a one-paragraph description of this massive endeavor that I somehow took on. It's a theme of betrayal. It's the whole book, both books. This and Chimes of Lost Cathedral, the underlying theme is betrayal, loyalty and betrayal and issues around this. So if I was going to go into more detail, I would just flesh this out. As her country goes through almost unimaginable upheaval, Marina's own coming of age unfolds, marked by deep passion, devastating loss, and the private heroism of an ordinary woman living through extraordinary times. So I don't have to say what happened. Every blow, and this person dies, and this person betrays this person, and, that's where people's eyes start to cross. They just can't take it in. So that's one paragraph. Then if I was going to expand it to 120 pages, I might talk about the two friends in her life, and often your friends are certain aspects of yourself. So this friend expresses her political radicalism. This friend is the bourgeois family life. Two men in her life, the same thing. One is from her old life, bourgeois life, and the other lover is a radical poet. And that would be it. I would not try to get any more detailed than that, because the people go nuts. They go, it's the most boring thing in the world. I've written them, I've seen other people write them, and it's just like the more you put in, the more boring it's going to seem. And you try to keep names out of it. I don't name the lovers. Her lover Kolya does this, and her lover, give them a tag instead: the radical poet, the former officer, the revolutionary school chum, the scholarly school chum. Because if you put in, more than 3 names in that synopsis, people will want to shoot themselves in the head. They can't keep them in mind, and it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Only your character's name matters. People have different take on whether to reveal the ending or not. But can you really synopsize Anna Karenina without mentioning that she's driven to suicide by the love affair of a type that her brother, having a similar love affair, doesn't dent his reputation? But to talk about Anna Karenina without mentioning her death would be ridiculous. So think about the overall shape of your book, and application for a residency, I don't see any problem with revealing the ending. Generally with a pitch to an agent, that's a real sales pitch, that synopsis. And I would not want to put the ending in there. I would make them want to read the book by the way I have described the setup. Let's see. There's the question of plot twists. I would just describe them rather than recount them, if you know what I mean. I would say, it's a twisty plot full of reversals, and, that this and this happened, rather than trying to say, but suddenly she discovers. That's not for a synopsis. It's too much detail. So see how much detail you can, see how much detail you can leave out and still adequately represent your book. So basically you want to know how the protagonist gets involved in the story. How does the story begin? Why do we begin? That's the kind of thing you've already thought about. Why am I beginning where I begin? We open, say this one, Marina M. has a prologue set in 1933. But I don't include it in the synopsis. I want to get you in. Oh, thank you. Denise is reading Chimes of Lost Cathedral. Excellent. You want to intrigue the reader. You want to give them the shape, the flavor. What makes your world interesting? What is interesting about your world? Why are we picking this anyway? Trinidad, a world of beauty and danger, It's tough to stay off the cliches. It's where Harry met Sally. That what they call comps, comparison books to compare. You could say, a bit like X book, but when you're applying for a literary retreat, I don't know that I would want to compare myself to another writer, or when Moby Dick met Brothers Karamazov or something like that. It's going to seem very strange to your or presumptuous to your committee. It's like, wow, we're thinking that this is Moby Dick meets Brothers Karamazov. Maybe so, maybe not. But you could certainly say, much like Fyodor Dostoevsky, much like the father Karamazov, I forgot his name, Yuri Yovanovitch does this, and this. So you want to explain the hero, who your protagonist is, what the basic conflict is, and the world that you're setting. And then you're going to probably go on to the major plot turns. But in a general way, keep your face out of the carpet. Pick the big ones, make sure that your antagonist is in there, maybe a secondary character not named but described. Don't name all these people. It makes it really hard to read. And then you can decide whether you want to reveal an ending. And if you don't know the exact ending, you say, or you're not done. I'm working towards the ending appears to be working towards this kind of an ending. But I would leave that ending out, just on personal preference, unless it's Anna Karenina. And actually, Anna Karenina does not end with the suicide. There's another whole section after that. You want to know kind of the relationship between a secondary character and the protagonist, the relationship between the antagonist and the protagonist. Like, what kind of a relationship is that? What is unfolding there? And then what's the issue? Like, where is the conflict? Is there an area where your protagonist is torn between two aims, two goals? What's stopping them? And so these are all story questions that you've hopefully addressed within yourself, or now is the time. And then you use that when you're synopsizing. What is at stake for the protagonists? What happens if they don't get what they want, if they don't succeed? That's important, because that's what makes them run. That's what they're searching for. So Jane asks, slightly related question: when submitting a writing sample that is not the beginning of the novel, would you summarize the story up to that point? You'd set it up so that a reader could read that section and basically understand what's going on. Here is a character, like in Marina, there's a scene where my character gets caught in a snowstorm and she's between villages, too far to go ahead, too far to go back. She miscalculated and is stuck there in Russia during the Russian Civil War. And I thought that was such a beautiful chapter. I wanted to submit that. I would have to say it is the middle of the Civil War, so we have the time. We know what our era is. That she is going to try to hide out at her parents' estate, her mother's estate in the countryside. She's going to try to hide out there during this time of political upheaval. And that she miscalculates the distance and is caught in a storm. And there you have it. So just tell enough, just set it up enough that the reader isn't completely at sea. Only what they absolutely need to know to understand that sample, not the overview. Because they should be able to see. I believe that every novel is holographic. That you should have imbued your every scene with the mood and the personality of your characters to an extent that a reader could open it anywhere. Say your book had been torn, a section of your book had been torn out and left on a bus bench. Somebody should be able to sit on that bus bench, start reading, and have a basic idea of who everybody is and when it is and what's going on. So, you can't just set your characters up and think that they're just going to forever after walk around in reader's mind. It has to constantly be recreated in front of the reader and reminded, so that every page has the personality, every page has the mood, every page has the senses, the sense of being in a certain place at a certain time. That we should basically know what's going on. When that villain shows up, we shouldn't have to have read it before, read the 4 chapters ago. You should be able to feel that that's a villain. We might not know what the problem immediately is, but we can sense the menace. We should be able to. So make sure if your work is properly written, the whole thing will carry the scent and the flavor of your progressive plot. Let's see if there's anything else about the outline. Yeah, hopefully this helps a bit. Usually you'll take people often start with the beginning for a writing sample, but if there's a place inside that happens to be just beautiful, that's going to be the knockout section, and you want to submit that, just set it up very extremely briefly, like a sentence or two, not a paragraph. Anything else I can answer for you? Yeah, the synopsis is really is very useful and worth doing, really, even if you're not submitting a sample. Try writing a synopsis of your book. Try doing 250 words and see if you can do it. It really will help clarify the issues of your book. If you find yourself, when somebody says, "What's your book about?" and you start telling them, and you keep adding stuff and you see people losing interest, you still don't know what your book is about. And you certainly don't know how to describe it yet. So it's a very useful thing to do. Okay. Well, And if you would like to try writing synopses, somebody suggested that Writer's Digest, I like Writer's Digest, that's another one. Occasionally you might look at their website. Writer's Digest suggests that the best synopses are the little thumbnails in Publishers Weekly. And you can get it through your library. So if you have a library card, you can probably read Publishers Weekly through your library card or through your library. And that they summarize very well. You also can go to your local bookstore and look at the catalogs they get describing the books coming up. You can look at little reviews in brief in the New Yorker. But it's a really good exercise to take a book that you've just finished or something that you know really well and see if you can synopsize it. And then see if you can synopsize it in a way that makes it sound interesting instead of, just, yeah, you've said what it's about, but it doesn't sound like a book anybody would want to read. So yeah, practice, give it a try. A very useful thing to know. So anyway, I wish you good reading, and we will see you next week for Writing Wednesday. Okay, bye.